Every morning for 10 years, I walked up the same cobblestone driveway, past the same wrought-iron gates, to deliver mail to a mansion where no one ever answered the door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The house at 847 Maple Street stood like a fortress behind towering oak trees, its windows always shuttered, its massive front door perpetually sealed. I knew someone lived there because the mail kept coming, bills kept getting paid, and occasionally I'd catch a glimpse of movement behind those heavy curtains. But in a decade of daily deliveries, I had never seen a face, never heard a voice, never received so much as a nod of acknowledgment from whoever called that lonely mansion home. My name is Diego Morales, and I'm a mailman in Riverside Heights, the kind of neighborhood where my beat-up Honda Civic looks out of place among the BMWs and Mercedes. For 10 years, I've carried my leather satchel up that same winding path, wondering about the mystery person who lived behind those walls. Some of my coworkers at the post office had theories. Carlos, my supervisor, insisted it was an eccentric millionaire who'd gone crazy after losing his fortune. Others whispered about a reclusive widow who couldn't bear to face the world after some terrible tragedy. But I never let myself get caught up in the gossip. I had my own problems to worry about, my own reasons for keeping my head down and focusing on the job that put food on my table and kept a roof over my daughter's head. Then one rainy Tuesday morning in October, everything changed. After 10 years of silence, the door finally opened, and the woman standing in that doorway looked at me with eyes that held more pain than anyone should have to carry. What happened next would transform both our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. This is the story of how a simple mail delivery became something extraordinary, how two broken people found healing in the most unexpected place, and how sometimes the longest journeys happen right on your own doorstep. Diego Morales had been walking the same mail route through Riverside Heights for exactly 10 years, 2 months, and 16 days when his life changed forever. He counted these things because precision mattered when you were a single father raising an 8-year-old daughter on a postal worker's salary. Every day had to be planned, every dollar accounted for, every moment between work and parenting carefully managed like the intricate clockwork that kept his small world functioning. The mansion at 847 Maple Street had always been the strangest stop on his route. While other houses in the affluent neighborhood buzzed with activity, lawn services, housekeepers coming and going, children playing in manicured yards, this particular house existed in perpetual silence. The 3-story Victorian structure sat behind towering iron gates that were never locked but never seemed to welcome visitors either. Its wraparound porch, painted in fading white, stretched across the front like arms that had forgotten how to embrace. Ivy crept up the sides of the house as if nature itself was trying to reclaim something that had been abandoned by human warmth. Diego had developed his own routine for this delivery. He would walk up the curved driveway, noting how his footsteps echoed differently on the old cobblestones depending on the weather. Rain made them slick and musical. Snow muffled everything into hushed whispers. On dry days, his work boots created a steady rhythm that seemed to announce his presence to the sleeping house. He would climb the 7 steps to the wide porch, cross to the ornate mailbox mounted beside the heavy oak door, and slip the day's delivery through the slot with practiced efficiency. The mail itself told a story of someone who existed but didn't quite live. Utility bills arrived with clockwork regularity and were apparently paid promptly, as the services never got disconnected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Medical bills came frequently, thick envelopes from specialists whose names Diego had memorized over the years. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, cardiologist. Dr. Michael Wong, psychiatrist. Dr. Sarah Kim, neurologist. There were grocery deliveries scheduled weekly, always the same organic market, always left at the service entrance around back. Bank statements arrived monthly from First National, suggesting someone was managing money but never spending it on anything interesting. No magazines, no catalogs, no personal letters. Just the infrastructure of a life reduced to its most basic functions. Diego had tried the doorbell exactly once during his first week on the route, when a certified letter required a signature. The sound had echoed through the house like a church bell in an empty cathedral, but no one came. He'd left a notice and taken the letter back to the post office, where it joined a growing pile of unclaimed certified mail addressed to Emma Catherine Walsh. After that, he simply delivered what came and left without expecting acknowledgment. His co-workers at the Riverside Heights postal facility had plenty of theories about the mysterious resident. Carlos Mendez, the route supervisor who had trained Diego a decade ago, swore the house was haunted by a woman who had lost her entire family in some tragic accident. Jennifer Park, who worked the adjacent route, insisted it was a former movie star who had become a hermit after a career-ending scandal. Tom Bradley, the oldest carrier at the facility, claimed he remembered when the house was full of life, before some unnamed tragedy turned it into a tomb for the living. Diego listened to their speculation with polite interest, but never contributed his own theories. He had learned long ago that other people's mysteries were luxuries he couldn't afford. His own life required too much attention, too much careful management, to waste energy wondering about someone else's choices. Every morning he woke at 5:30, prepared breakfast for his daughter Sophia, walked her to Lincoln Elementary School, reported to the post office by 7:15, completed his route by 3:30, picked Sophia up from after-school care, helped with homework, prepared dinner, supervised bath time, read bedtime stories, and fell into bed exhausted only to repeat the cycle the next day. Sophia was 8 years old, brilliant, and curious about everything in the world except why her mother had left them when she was barely 2. Diego had learned to deflect those questions with gentle redirection, focusing instead on building a life stable enough that Sophia would never doubt her father's commitment to being present for every day of her childhood. The mansion on Maple Street was simply one stop among 47 others on his route, notable only for its consistent silence and the way it made him grateful for the noise and chaos of his own small apartment. But on that rainy Tuesday morning in October, as Diego approached the familiar porch with his leather satchel heavy with the day's delivery, he noticed something different. One of the upstairs windows had its curtain pulled slightly back, creating a thin vertical line of darkness against the white fabric. For just a moment he thought he saw movement, a shadow that might have been someone watching his approach. The sensation made him pause at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the window with sudden awareness that after 10 years of one-sided routine, someone might actually be paying attention to his daily visits. He climbed the steps as usual, crossed to the mailbox, and was reaching for the slot when the massive oak door opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. The woman standing in the doorway looked like she had been carved from marble and left unfinished. Emma Walsh was probably in her early 40s, though grief had a way of aging people that had nothing to do with years. Her auburn hair hung loose around pale shoulders, and she wore a simple gray sweater that seemed to swallow her thin frame. But it was her eyes that stopped Diego's breath completely. They were the deepest green he had ever seen, like forest pools that had never known sunlight, and they held a kind of exhaustion that went far beyond physical tiredness. "You're Diego," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might shatter something fragile between them. "I've watched you walk up this driveway every morning for 10 years. You're always exactly on time. 7:43 in the morning. Every single day except Sundays and holidays." Diego stood frozen on her porch, mail still clutched in his hand, unsure whether he was experiencing a miracle or stepping into someone else's breakdown. After a decade of silence, this felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Diego Morales. I deliver your mail." "I know," Emma said, stepping back slightly but not closing the door. "Would you like to come in? I've been thinking about talking to someone for a very long time, and you're the only person I see regularly, even if you don't see me." The inside of the mansion was nothing like Diego had imagined during his years of speculation. Instead of the dusty, neglected interior he had pictured, the house was immaculately maintained, but felt like a museum where no one was allowed to touch anything. The hardwood floors gleamed with recent polishing. Fresh flowers sat in crystal vases throughout the entryway, and expensive artwork lined the walls in perfect symmetry. Everything was beautiful, elegant, and completely devoid of any sense that actual human life happened within these walls. Emma led him through a formal living room into a smaller sitting area where tall windows looked out onto a garden that was equally well-maintained and equally lifeless. She gestured for him to sit in a leather armchair while she perched on the edge of a sofa, her hands folded in her lap like a child waiting to be scolded. "I should explain," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "about why I never answered the door. About why I've been living like this for so long." Diego wanted to tell her that she didn't owe him any explanations, that he was just the mailman, and she was entitled to her privacy. But something in her expression suggested that she needed to tell this story more than he needed to hear it, and he had learned enough about carrying burdens to recognize when someone was asking for help holding their load. Emma Walsh had once been Dr. Emma Catherine Walsh, one of the most promising pediatric surgeons on the East Coast. She had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School, completed her residency at Johns Hopkins, and by age 35 was heading the pediatric cardiac surgery department at Riverside General Hospital. Her colleagues respected her precision, her patients trusted her completely, and medical journals published her research on innovative techniques for correcting congenital heart defects in newborns. She had married Dr. James Walsh during their residency years, a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. They shared the same dedication to medicine, the same drive to save lives, and the same dream of building a family once their careers were established. They had bought the mansion on Maple Street as a symbol of their success and their commitment to creating something lasting together. The house was supposed to be filled with children's laughter, family dinners, and the comfortable chaos of a life well lived. For 5 years, Emma threw herself into her work with the intensity of someone who believed that professional achievement could compensate for personal emptiness. She told herself that they were simply waiting for the right time to start their family, that their careers needed to be secure before they could focus on anything else. James supported this decision, or at least never challenged it directly, though Emma sometimes caught him watching other couples with their children, with an expression of longing that he never voiced aloud. The call came on a Thursday evening in March, while Emma was reviewing surgical notes for the next day's procedures. James had been driving home from a late consultation when a drunk driver ran a red light and struck his car at 60 miles per hour. He was pronounced dead at the scene, never making it to the emergency room where Emma spent her days saving other people's families. The irony was devastating. Emma Walsh, who had dedicated her life to healing, couldn't save the one person who mattered most to her. The woman who could repair the tiniest hearts with surgical precision was powerless to fix her own heart when it shattered completely. She took a leave of absence from the hospital that stretched into months, then years, as she discovered that grief was not something that could be operated on or cured with medication. The mansion that was supposed to represent their shared future became a prison, where Emma could hide from a world that expected her to eventually heal and move forward. She stopped seeing friends who offered comfort she couldn't accept. She avoided family members who suggested that James would want her to find happiness again. She resigned from the hospital rather than face the constant reminders of the life she and James had planned to build together. Emma's days became exercises in minimal survival. She woke each morning, maintained the house with obsessive precision because disorder felt like another kind of death, ordered groceries that she barely touched, and paid bills for services that kept her isolated world functioning without requiring human interaction. She watched Diego's daily deliveries from upstairs windows, noting his reliability, his gentle treatment of her mail, the way he never lingered or seemed to judge the silence that greeted his presence. Over the years, she learned details about his life through observation. She saw him hurry on rainy days, knowing he needed to pick up his daughter from school. She noticed when he looked tired, when he smiled at something on his phone, when he paused to pet neighborhood cats that wandered across her driveway. Diego became her only connection to the outside world, a daily reminder that life continued beyond her grief, even if she couldn't figure out how to rejoin it. Meanwhile, Diego's own story had been shaped by abandonment and the desperate desire to be everything his daughter needed. He had met Maria Gonzalez during their senior year at Riverside Community College, where he was studying business administration, and she was pursuing early childhood education. Their romance felt like something from a movie, intense and passionate, and full of promises about the future they would build together. They married 6 months after graduation in a small ceremony at St. Anthony's Catholic Church, surrounded by family members who offered advice about patience and compromise and the importance of growing together rather than apart. Diego found work at the post office, attracted by the steady pay and excellent benefits that would support the family they planned to start immediately. Maria took a job at a local daycare, claiming she wanted to practice caring for children before having her own. Sophia was born on a snowy December morning after 18 hours of labor that left both parents exhausted and overwhelmed by the intensity of loving someone so completely helpless. For the first year, they managed the sleepless nights and endless demands of parenthood by taking turns and supporting each other through the hardest moments. Diego worked overtime whenever possible to cover the medical bills and childcare costs, while Maria stayed home with Sophia during her maternity leave. But as Sophia grew from a demanding infant into a curious toddler, Maria began expressing doubts about motherhood that she had never mentioned before. She complained about feeling trapped, about missing the independence she had enjoyed before marriage, about the way her entire identity had been consumed by someone else's needs. Diego tried to be understanding, encouraging Maria to take time for herself, arranging for his mother to babysit so they could have date nights, suggesting that Maria return to work part-time if staying home felt too isolating. Nothing he offered seemed to address whatever was eating at Maria from the inside. She became distant, irritable, resentful of the very routine that Diego found comforting. She started staying out late with friends, claiming she needed space to remember who she was outside of being someone's wife and mother. Diego accommodated these requests because he loved her and believed that marriage meant supporting your partner through difficult transitions. The morning Maria left, Sophia was 22 months old and just beginning to speak in full sentences. Diego woke to find a note on the kitchen table explaining that Maria couldn't pretend to be happy anymore, that she had never really wanted the domestic life they had built together, and that Sophia would be better off with a parent who actually wanted to be there. She had taken her clothes, her car, and half their savings account, leaving behind only a forwarding address for a friend's apartment 3 states away. Diego spent the first weeks after Maria's departure in a state of shock that alternated between rage and desperate hope that she would come back. He hired a lawyer to explore his options for child support, only to discover that Maria had quit her job and claimed to have no income. He considered pursuing her across state lines to demand that she take responsibility for the daughter she had abandoned, but his lawyer advised that the courts were unlikely to force an unwilling parent into shared custody. Gradually, Diego realized that his anger was a luxury he couldn't afford while raising a toddler alone. Sophia needed stability, routine, and a father who was present rather than bitter about the parent who had chosen to leave. He developed systems for managing single parenthood that revolved around predictability and careful planning. Every morning had the same structure. Every evening followed the same pattern. Every weekend included the same activities that Sophia could count on. The post office job that had once seemed temporary became his career because it offered the security and benefits that Sophia's future required. Diego stopped thinking about the business degree he had never used, or the entrepreneurial dreams he had once harbored. His ambition narrowed to a single goal: being the kind of father who would never leave, never disappoint, never force his daughter to question whether she was worthy of unconditional love. Now sitting in Emma Walsh's pristine living room, Diego found himself sharing pieces of his story with someone who seemed to understand that grief and loss could reshape a person's entire existence. Emma listened without offering platitudes or advice, simply nodding as he explained how single parenthood had taught him to find meaning in small victories and daily reliability rather than grand gestures or dramatic changes. Sophia doesn't remember her mother, Diego said quietly. Sometimes I think that's a blessing, but other times I worry that she'll grow up thinking that women just disappear from people's lives without warning. Emma was quiet for a long moment, looking out at her perfect garden where nothing seemed to grow wild or unplanned. I used to think that if you loved someone enough, if you were careful enough, you could protect them from everything harmful in the world. But loss finds everyone eventually, doesn't it? The only choice is whether you let it destroy you or teach you something about what really matters. As Diego prepared to leave and continue his route, Emma walked him to the door with movements that seemed lighter than when she had first opened it. "Would it be all right if I left something for you tomorrow?" she asked. "Something for Sophia? I have books that belong to children I used to know, and they shouldn't just sit empty on shelves forever." Diego agreed, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing to beyond the possibility that the silence between them might finally be broken after 10 years of parallel loneliness. The next morning, Diego found a carefully wrapped package waiting beside Emma's mailbox. Inside was a collection of children's books that looked like they had been treasured but rarely touched. Each volume was in perfect condition, with bookmarks made from pressed flowers marking favorite passages. A handwritten note tucked between the pages read simply, "For Sophia, from someone who believes every child deserves to know that stories can take you anywhere you want to go." Diego carried the books home with a strange lightness in his chest, as if something that had been locked away for years was finally beginning to open. That evening, as he and Sophia settled into their nightly reading routine, he presented the gift without mentioning its mysterious origin. Sophia's eyes widened as she examined each book with the reverence she reserved for truly special things. "Daddy, these are beautiful," she whispered, running her small fingers over the embossed covers. "Who gave them to us?" "Someone who wanted to share something special with a little girl who loves stories," Diego replied, which was true enough without being complicated. Sophia selected a book about a young girl who befriended the moon, and they read together until she fell asleep against his shoulder, the book still clutched in her hands. The pattern that developed over the following weeks felt natural, like water finding its way around stones. Each morning Diego would find something small waiting with Emma's mail. Sometimes it was a book, other times a piece of fruit from trees in her garden, occasionally a hand-drawn picture of birds that visited her windows. Nothing expensive or dramatic, just quiet acknowledgments that someone was thinking about the people who walked past her door each day. Diego began leaving small tokens of his own. A photograph Sophia had drawn of the post office where he worked. A newspaper clipping about a community garden project that might interest someone who clearly cared about growing things. A thank you note written in Sophia's careful handwriting, thanking the book lady for sharing stories that made bedtime even more special. Their first real conversation since that initial meeting happened on a Thursday morning when Diego arrived to find Emma sitting on her porch steps, holding a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise paint her garden in shades of gold and pink. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time since he had known her, she smiled. "I've been thinking about what you said," Emma began without preamble. "About Sophia not remembering her mother. I think maybe that gives you an opportunity to show her what love looks like when it stays." Diego set down his mailbag and accepted the second cup of coffee Emma offered from a thermos beside her. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made everything seem possible. "I worry sometimes that I'm not enough," he admitted. "That she needs things I can't give her." "I used to operate on children's hearts," Emma said quietly. "Tiny hearts that were born wrong, that couldn't pump blood the way they were supposed to. Some surgeries were incredibly complex, requiring teams of specialists and hours of precise work. But the most important thing I learned was that a heart doesn't need to be perfect to sustain a life. It just needs to keep beating steadily, day after day, without stopping." They talked for nearly an hour that morning, sharing stories about their work, their fears, their small daily victories. Emma spoke about the garden she maintained with obsessive care, how tending to growing things had become her way of staying connected to life when everything else felt impossible. Diego described the satisfaction he found in his mail route, the way knowing his neighbors through their mail had taught him that everyone was carrying something difficult. Everyone was hoping for good news that might never come. When Diego finally had to continue his route, Emma walked with him to the gate, something she hadn't done in the 10 years he had been visiting her house. "Would you like to bring Sophia by sometime?" she asked. "I have a swing set in the backyard that hasn't been used in years. It seems wrong to waste something that was meant to bring joy to children." The following Saturday afternoon, Diego found himself walking up Emma's driveway with Sophia skipping beside him, chattering excitedly about meeting the mysterious woman who had been sharing books and drawings. Emma met them at the door wearing jeans and a sweater the color of autumn leaves, looking more alive than Diego had ever seen her. The backyard was a revelation. While the front garden was formal and controlled, the space behind the house felt like a secret world where magic might actually exist. Ancient oak trees provided shade for flower beds that seemed to grow in organized wildness. A stone path wound between herb gardens and fruit trees, leading to a wooden swing set that looked like it had been built by someone who understood exactly what children needed to feel safe while flying through the air. Sophia ran immediately to the swings, calling for Diego to push her higher and higher until her laughter echoed off the surrounding trees. Emma watched from a distance at first, her expression unreadable, but gradually moved closer until she was standing beside Diego, both of them focused on the pure joy of a child discovering something wonderful. "She's beautiful," Emma said softly. "She has your eyes, but there's something about her spirit that's entirely her own." "She's the best thing I've ever done," Diego replied. "The only thing I'm certain I got right." Over the next hour, Emma transformed from a nervous observer into someone who remembered how to play. She showed Sophia how to make flower crowns from daisies, taught her the names of different birds that visited the garden, and helped her collect smooth stones from a small pond to paint later. Sophia accepted Emma's attention with the easy trust of a child who had been loved consistently, asking questions about everything and listening to the answers with genuine interest. As the afternoon stretched into early evening, Emma invited them inside for dinner. The formal dining room had been set with her finest china, as if this simple meal was an occasion worthy of celebration. Sophia sat in a chair that had probably been intended for much more sophisticated guests, using her very best manners while telling Emma about her school, her friends, and her dream of becoming either a veterinarian or a princess, depending on which seemed more practical when she grew up. Emma listened to Sophia's stories with the focused attention of someone who had forgotten how much joy there was in seeing the world through a child's eyes. She asked thoughtful questions about Sophia's classes, her favorite books, and her opinions on important matters like whether chocolate chip cookies were better than sugar cookies, and why cats seemed to know secrets that dogs didn't. After dinner, while Sophia explored Emma's library with the reverence of someone discovering treasure, Diego helped clear the dishes and found himself standing beside Emma at the kitchen sink, both of them watching through the window as the garden settled into twilight. "I haven't had guests in this house for 8 years, Emma said quietly. "I had forgotten what it felt like to cook for someone else, to set the table knowing that people I cared about would sit there. Thank you for reminding me that homes are meant to be shared." "Thank you for opening your door," Diego replied, "for giving Sophia someone else who sees how special she is, for showing me that it's possible to let people in without losing yourself." As they prepared to leave, Emma walked them to the gate again, but this time she hugged Sophia goodbye, holding her just long enough to whisper something that made Sophia giggle and promise to come back soon. She shook Diego's hand with both of hers, her touch warm and steady. "Same time next Saturday?" Emma asked, and Diego nodded, realizing that his carefully controlled routine was beginning to include something he had never planned for but somehow desperately needed. The weeks that followed brought a gradual expansion of their unusual friendship. Emma began joining Diego for coffee on her porch several mornings a week, their conversations ranging from practical matters like Sophia's school projects to deeper topics about rebuilding life after loss. She helped Sophia with a science project about plant growth, providing both expertise and a greenhouse where they could conduct experiments with different soil conditions and sunlight exposure. Diego found himself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that surprised him. After years of focusing solely on providing stability for Sophia, he had forgotten what it felt like to have an adult friendship based on mutual interest rather than shared obligation. Emma was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny once her shyness began to fade. She remembered details about his stories, asked about his day with genuine interest, and offered insights about parenting that came from a place of caring rather than judgment. Sophia adored Emma with the wholehearted enthusiasm she brought to everything that captured her interest. She drew pictures of Emma's garden to share with her class, wrote stories about adventures she and Emma might have together, and began referring to their Saturday visits as the best part of her week. When other children asked about her family, Sophia would mention Emma as naturally as she talked about her father, describing her as "my friend who knows everything about flowers and has the most beautiful house in the world." The transformation in Emma was remarkable to witness. The woman who had hidden behind curtains for nearly a decade began venturing into her front yard to tend flower boxes where Diego could see her during his morning deliveries. She started wearing brighter colors, styling her hair with more care, and speaking with increasing confidence about topics that interested her. The house itself seemed to come alive in response to her renewed engagement with the world, as if the building had been waiting for its owner to remember how to live within its walls. One afternoon in late November, as they sat in Emma's kitchen while Sophia napped on the living room sofa, Emma turned to Diego with an expression that held both vulnerability and determination. "I've been thinking about going back to work," she said quietly. "Not surgery. I don't think I could handle that kind of pressure anymore. But maybe consulting, or teaching, or volunteering at the free clinic downtown. I've been hiding for so long that I had forgotten I might have something useful to offer the world again." Diego reached across the table to squeeze her hand, feeling how much courage it had taken for her to voice this possibility aloud. "I think that's wonderful," he said. "And I think there are people out there who need exactly what you have to give them." As winter approached and their friendship deepened, Diego began to realize that something fundamental had shifted in his life. For the first time since Maria had left, he was thinking about the future as something that might hold possibilities beyond simple survival and Sophia's immediate needs. Emma had shown him that it was possible to heal from devastating loss without forgetting what had been lost. That opening your heart again didn't diminish the love you had carried for someone who was gone. But he also sensed that their growing closeness was approaching a threshold that would require both of them to decide whether they were ready to risk the vulnerability that deeper connection would demand. The question was no longer whether they cared about each other, but whether they were brave enough to acknowledge how much they had come to mean to each other's daily happiness. The photograph appeared on the front page of the Riverside Heights Gazette on a Tuesday morning in December, capturing a moment that Diego hadn't even realized was being observed. The image showed him and Emma sitting on her porch steps, Sophia curled between them as they read from one of the children's books Emma had gifted. All three of them were laughing at something on the page, their faces relaxed and genuinely happy. The headline read, "Mystery Mansion Owner Emerges After Decade of Isolation. Local Mailman's Friendship Breaks Years of Silence." Diego stared at the newspaper in disbelief as he stood in the post office break room, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The article revealed Emma's identity as the former Dr. Emma Walsh, detailed her medical career and her husband's tragic death, and speculated about the nature of her relationship with postal worker Diego Morales and his young daughter. The journalist had somehow obtained information about Emma's reclusive years, her substantial inheritance, and even included quotes from unnamed neighbors who claimed to have witnessed their romantic encounters in the garden. Carlos Mendez appeared at Diego's shoulder, reading over the article with a low whistle. "Man, this is not good," he said quietly. "You know Mrs. Patterson's been looking for any excuse to question your professionalism since that incident with the Henderson's dog last summer." Patricia Patterson was the district postal supervisor, a woman who ruled her territory with military precision and had little tolerance for employees who attracted attention for any reason. She had built her career on maintaining the post office's reputation for reliability and discretion, and she considered any postal worker who appeared in the newspaper to be a potential liability. Diego was summoned to Mrs. Patterson's office before his route even began that morning. She sat behind her desk in a crisp navy suit, the newspaper spread open in front of her like evidence at a trial. Her expression was stern as she gestured for Diego to sit in the chair across from her. "Mr. Morales," she began without preamble, "this article presents a very serious problem for the Postal Service's reputation. Our employees are expected to maintain professional boundaries with customers, not develop personal relationships that become tabloid fodder. Mrs. Patterson, it's not what the article makes it seem," Diego said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mrs. Walsh is just a friend. She's been isolated for years, and we've simply been helping each other through difficult circumstances." "The optics are terrible," Mrs. Patterson replied coldly. "A postal worker befriending a wealthy recluse, spending time at her mansion, involving his child in what appears to be a romantic relationship. Do you understand how this makes the entire postal service look? Like we're taking advantage of vulnerable customers for personal gain." Diego felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I have never taken advantage of Mrs. Walsh. Our friendship developed naturally over months of conversation. She's been like family to Sophia and me." "Family," Mrs. Patterson repeated with obvious skepticism. "Mr. Morales, I'm placing you on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into your conduct. You're to have no contact with Mrs. Walsh during this period, and if any evidence emerges that you violated postal regulations regarding customer relationships, your employment will be terminated immediately." The words hit Diego like a physical blow. The post office job wasn't just his career. It was the foundation of everything he had built for Sophia. The health insurance, The steady paycheck, the pension plan that would secure their future. Without this job, he would lose not just his income but the stability that had allowed him to be the kind of father Sophia needed. "Mrs. Patterson, please," Diego said, his voice betraying his desperation. "I've worked here for 10 years without a single complaint. My route performance is exemplary. This friendship has never interfered with my professional duties." "The perception of impropriety is as damaging as actual impropriety," she replied firmly. "You should have considered the consequences before allowing your personal life to become public in this manner. Clean out your locker and report to Human Resources for the administrative leave paperwork." Diego walked home in a daze, his mind reeling from how quickly his carefully constructed world had begun to collapse. He had built his entire adult life around providing security for Sophia, and now that security was threatened because he had dared to let someone else matter to them. When he arrived at Emma's house to explain what had happened, he found news vans parked outside her gates and reporters clustered on the sidewalk. The quiet street that had been their private sanctuary was now a circus of media attention, with photographers trying to capture images through the wrought-iron fence and journalists approaching anyone who walked by for comments about the, quote, romance between the mailman and the millionaire. Diego managed to slip through the back gate, finding Emma in her kitchen with all the curtains drawn and her phone ringing constantly. She looked pale and shaken, her hands trembling as she tried to prepare tea that she clearly didn't want. "They've been out there since dawn," Emma said without looking up, "knocking on the door, calling my name, asking neighbors about our relationship. I had forgotten what it felt like to be hunted by people who think your private life belongs to them." Diego told her about his suspension, watching her face crumple with guilt and self-recrimination. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "I should have thought about how being seen with me might affect your job. I've been hiding for so long that I forgot how cruel people can be when they think they've discovered a story worth telling." "It's not your fault," Diego said firmly. "We haven't done anything wrong. We're friends who care about each other. That should be allowed." But even as he spoke the words, Diego felt doubt creeping into his mind. Was he being naive about the situation? Had he been selfish in pursuing a friendship that could jeopardize Sophia's security? The questions tormented him as he realized that his feelings for Emma had grown beyond simple friendship, even if he had never acted on those deeper emotions. The media attention intensified over the following days. Photographers camped outside Diego's apartment building, trying to get pictures of him and Sophia. Reporters approached Sophia's school, forcing Diego to arrange for her to stay with his mother until the attention died down. His neighbors, who had always been friendly, now looked at him with curiosity and speculation that made him feel exposed and vulnerable. The worst moment came when a tabloid published a story claiming that Diego had been, quote, gold-digging from the beginning, that he had deliberately cultivated Emma's friendship for financial gain. The article included quotes from unnamed postal workers suggesting that Diego had always been opportunistic, that he had targeted the wealthy residents on his route for personal advantage. Diego knew the quotes were lies, but seeing his character assassinated in print was devastating. He had spent years building a reputation for integrity and hard work, and now strangers were questioning his motives for befriending someone who had desperately needed human connection. Emma called him that evening, her voice thick with tears. "I can't let this continue," she said. "It's destroying your life, threatening Sophia's stability. I think we need to stay away from each other until this dies down." "Emma, no," Diego said, but he could hear the finality in her voice. "I'm going to release a statement tomorrow clarifying that we're merely acquaintances, that any reports of a romantic relationship are false. It's the only way to protect your job and Sophia's future." Diego wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that running away wouldn't solve anything, that they deserved better than to let other people's judgment destroy something good. But as he looked around his small apartment, thinking about Sophia's school tuition and medical insurance and all the ways his daughter's life depended on his steady employment, he realized that Emma was probably right. The next morning, Emma's statement appeared in the same newspaper that had started the controversy. She described Diego as a courteous postal worker who has always conducted himself with complete professionalism and denied any personal relationship beyond occasional conversations about neighborhood matters. The statement was clearly crafted by lawyers, cold and formal, and designed to create as much distance as possible between them. Diego read the statement while sitting in his empty apartment, Sofia still staying with his mother for safety. The words accomplished their purpose, beginning to shift the media narrative away from romance toward a more mundane story about misunderstood friendships. But they also felt like a betrayal of everything real that had developed between them, reducing months of genuine connection to occasional conversations that meant nothing to anyone. That afternoon, Diego drove to Emma's house one last time, finding the media circus finally dispersing as the story lost its sensational appeal. Emma answered the door looking exhausted and defeated, her eyes red from crying. "I had to protect you," she said before he could speak. "I had to protect Sofia. This is what happens when someone like me tries to have a normal life. Everything gets twisted into something ugly." "So you're going back into hiding?" Diego asked, his heart breaking as he watched her retreat into the shell she had spent months learning to shed. "It's better this way," Emma replied, though her voice suggested she didn't believe her own words. "You and Sofia deserve a life without this kind of scrutiny. You deserve someone who can love you without bringing chaos into your world." Diego wanted to tell her that chaos was worth it if it meant keeping her in their lives, that he and Sofia were strong enough to weather media storms and gossip and other people's opinions. But looking at Emma's face, he could see that the attention had reawakened old fears about vulnerability and loss that she wasn't ready to face again. He left without arguing further, understanding that sometimes loving someone meant accepting their choice to protect themselves, even when that choice felt like another kind of loss. As he drove away from Maple Street, Diego realized that the safety he had worked so hard to build for Sofia had come at a cost he was only now beginning to understand. In protecting themselves from risk, they had also protected themselves from the possibility of joy that came with letting other people matter enough to change your life. 3 months of silence stretched between Diego and Emma like a wound that refused to heal. Diego had been reinstated to his postal route after the investigation found no evidence of misconduct, but walking past 847 Maple Street each morning felt like visiting a grave. The house had returned to its former state of shuttered windows and sealed doors, as if their friendship had been nothing more than a brief dream. Sofia asked about Emma constantly, her 8-year-old heart unable to understand why someone who had brought them so much joy had suddenly disappeared from their lives. Diego struggled to explain adult fears and public scrutiny to a child who measured relationships by simple kindness and shared laughter. The call came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Diego recognized Dr. Martinez's voice immediately, though he hadn't heard from Sofia's pediatrician in months. "Mr. Morales, I have Emma Walsh here in my emergency room," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "She collapsed at the grocery store this afternoon. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, signs of prolonged isolation and depression. She's asking for you." Diego arranged for his mother to stay with Sofia and drove to Riverside General Hospital through streets slick with spring rain. He found Emma in a private room, looking fragile against the white sheets, her auburn hair spread across the pillow like autumn leaves scattered by wind. "I'm sorry," she whispered when she saw him. "I know I have no right to call you after what I put you through, but I couldn't think of anyone else who might understand why I'm here." Dr. Martinez explained that Emma had been found unconscious in the produce aisle, apparently having eaten very little for weeks. Her isolation had become complete again, but this time it was slowly killing her rather than simply preserving her from the world's judgment. "I tried to go back to the way things were before," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "But I had forgotten how empty that life was until you and Sofia showed me what connection could feel like. I've been dying slowly ever since I closed that door." Diego sat beside her bed, taking her hand in both of his. "We've been dying a little too," he admitted. "Sofia draws pictures of your garden every week. I catch myself looking for you on your porch every morning, hoping you've decided to trust us again." "The reporters have moved on to other stories," Emma said. "I checked. There haven't been any articles about us in 2 months. I think it's safe now, if you're willing to try again." Over the next week, as Emma recovered in the hospital, Diego brought Sofia to visit every evening after school. Sofia climbed into the hospital bed to read stories aloud, her presence seeming to restore color to Emma's cheeks more effectively than any medication. The three of them talked about everything they had missed during their months apart, rebuilding their connection with the patience of people who had learned how precious such bonds truly were. When Emma was discharged, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of returning to the isolated mansion that had become her prison, she put the house on the market and used the proceeds to purchase a smaller home 3 blocks from Diego's apartment. The new house had a front porch perfect for morning coffee, a backyard where Sophia could play safely, and neighbors who valued privacy without demanding complete invisibility. Emma also returned to medicine, accepting a position at the free clinic downtown, where her surgical skills could help patients who couldn't afford private care. Working with people who faced real struggles put the media circus into perspective, reminding her that public opinion mattered far less than the ability to heal and help others. 6 months later, on a perfect Saturday morning in September, Diego found himself standing in Emma's new kitchen, helping prepare breakfast while Sophia set the table with the careful precision she brought to all important tasks. The domestic scene felt natural now, like something they had been building toward for years rather than months. "I have something to ask you," Diego said as Emma poured orange juice into Sophia's favorite glass. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box containing a simple gold ring set with a single emerald, the color of Emma's eyes. 10 years ago, I walked up to a house where no one ever answered the door," he said. "I thought I was just delivering mail, but I was actually delivering myself to the person who would teach me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be lasting. Emma Walsh, will you marry a mailman who promises to show up for you every single day, rain or shine, for the rest of our lives?" Emma's yes was drowned out by Sophia's delighted shriek and the sound of orange juice glasses hitting the floor as all three of them embraced in the sunny kitchen of a house that had been built for happiness. Their wedding 6 months later was held in Emma's backyard garden, surrounded by friends from the post office, colleagues from the clinic, and neighbors who had watched their love story unfold with approval rather than judgment. Sophia served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her beaming smile outshining the spring flowers that bloomed around them. As Diego slipped the wedding ring onto Emma's finger, he thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 broken people who had learned to heal together, a friendship that had survived public scrutiny and private fears, and a love that had grown from the simple act of showing up consistently for someone who needed to know that not everyone leaves. The house at 847 Maple Street eventually sold to a young family with children who filled it with the laughter it had been designed to hold. But sometimes, when Diego's postal route took him past the old neighborhood, he would pause at the familiar gate and remember the morning when a door finally opened, changing everything he thought he knew about delivery and love and the courage required to let someone else matter enough to transform your entire world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.